Hello, everybody. It is Miss Gooding, and I am here today to talk about ancient Greece. Ancient Greece was at its height in the 4th and 5th centuries before Common Era, and it is an incredibly beautiful place to visit. It is a landscape of mountains and seas. This is a kind of a close-up map of Greece, and there are more than 1,400 islands. Some of them are inhabited and some of them really are not. The climate is pretty mild in the winter and exceptionally hot in the summertime. I was there in mid-August, and with a 75-pound backpack, it was pretty toasty. Back in ancient Greek times, people were largely tradespeople, a lot of fishermen and traders and sailors, and there were some farmers as well, and they grew things like wheat and grapes and olives, and they also raised sheep and things like that. The city states were largely determined by geography. It was not easy to travel from island to island or from place to place because of the terrain. And so the geography really established the boundaries of these city states. And I will talk more about the most popular, well known city states a little bit later in this lecture. Here are some pictures of Greece. Predominantly, these are the islands. This one up here with the blue domes is Santorini, and I was there. It was beautiful, just whitewashed, clean, um, really gorgeous, and so it's definitely worth traveling to if you can save up enough money to do so, or can travel on the cheap like I did. Greek city-states were how they were organized politically and geographically. They are also known as polises. By about 500 before Common Era, there were dozens of them, and there grew to be over 1,000 city-states. And really, these again are geographically locations geographically, and they also have individual governments. So they had some similarities and some differences. First of all, the similarities were that they all spoke Greek, they worshiped the Greek gods, and they all participated in the Olympic events. So those were some things that kind of held them together as a nation. The differences were there were very distinct governments, and you'll see that especially between the Spartans and the Athenians, which I will talk about in just a little bit. And they also had their own individual local gods, and in addition to the overall big Greek gods that you've probably all heard of. There were various types of governments in Greece. There were tyrannies, which, the tyrants would rise up and seize the government. There were monarchies, there were democracies, and the democracies in Greece were very different than the democracy that here we have in the United States of America, and I'll talk about that. There was also oligarchies, and an oligarchy is when a small, usually wealthy group of people runs the government. So, what did democracy really mean in Athens? And again, Athens was one of the city states. And so, right now, here in the United States of America, about 67% of Americans are eligible to vote. The people that are not eligible to vote are people that are under 18 and also convicted felons. Back in ancient Greece, it was more like 12 or 13% of people. So, it was only men. So, no women could vote, slaves could not vote. And obviously children could not vote. And so there was definitely a difference in the democracy. And so you saw a lot of wealthy people making the decisions for the government and being able to vote. And so even though the United States took ideas from Greece and Grecian democracy, our democracy is much more widespread, I guess you would say. There is a video here that you can probably Google for. I am going to click and it's going to start playing and then I'll have to click again. But in this short lecture, I don't want to spend the time to watch this video. But again, you can look it up. It's a TED Talk. It's pretty cool. All right. Athens, again, a major city-state, and it was named for Athena, goddess of wisdom and courage, civilization, justice, etc. And oftentimes she was symbolized with an owl. Owl is her symbol. And she was the one that turned Medusa into a gorgon. And again, this is a video about that occurrence, but I am not going to play it for you. But you can look it up online. Sparta was another city-state, very powerful at this time, and supposedly was named after a mythological princess. And it was ruled by two kings. And so, really, instead of a democracy, even though they did vote on stuff, it was ruled by the ruling class. It was a group of people that took over the government and really did run it rather than it being run by the people, which is the definition of a democracy. Sparta, they were very well known for their fighting ability, the warrior like attitudes, and they did fight Athens quite well, pretty significantly during the Peloponnesian War, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. But they definitely honored Zeus, Apollo, Artemis, and Athena. The men and women of Sparta had definite roles. The men of Sparta left home at age 7 to begin their warrior training. And they could marry at 20, but had to sleep in the barracks until they were aged 30. And they really served a lifetime in the military. And sometimes that was up to age 60 because back then people didn't live quite as long as they do now due to modern medicine and things like that. But they did serve a lifetime. The women of Sparta did not fight, but they did have some political rights. They could own land and they also could participate in sports. The Spartan government was an oligarchy. Again, they were run by a small, wealthy group of people. The Spartans could vote, but by showing hands or by yelling. But they definitely looked at democracy, especially the Athenian democracy, with skepticism. And you know those different kind of city states, they warred against one another because of some of these differences. The Athenian government was democratic, and for the most part, and democratic means it belongs to the people, which traditionally means that people get to elect their leaders and they get to vote. And so men were only allowed to vote. Again, no women, no children, and no slaves. All of the city-states participated in the Olympic Games, and we still celebrate them today. The Olympic Games originally were held in Olympia, Greece. They were held over 4 years. And so city-states, if they were warring against each other, they agreed to a truce so that they could participate in the games peacefully. And these athletes were really, really well respected for their abilities, especially in the sports that they participated in. The Greek gods and goddesses are, many of them are listed here, and obviously not a complete list, but the Greeks were, they worshiped more than one god. And so they were polytheistic. And they did have individual gods for their individual city states and geographic areas. But again, the ones listed here were pretty standard, big, well-known ones that were worshipped all across Greece. And then, of course, the Romans took a lot of these and adopted them, renamed them as their own Roman gods and goddesses. The Persian Wars were fought, and Persia actually invaded Greece. And Persia then did lose, but the Persian Wars lasted for a long time, like half a century. And so it was this back and forth, back and forth. And Greece was able to win, but it did take a lot of effort. And again, there's a video that you can look up. There's probably quite a few of them online if you're interested in learning more about the Persian Wars. All right, Pericles was he was a leader in many different ways. He lived during this time period known as the Golden Age of Athens, where there was a lot of progress intellectually and with regards to architecture, science advancements, and things like that. But he lived from 495 to 429 BCE. He led the Athenian army to victory during the Persian Wars, and he was the one that really encouraged walls to be built around Athens in order to strengthen their physical resolve against being attacked by outside forces. He definitely believed in strong Athenian democracy. He supported the arts, and he actually reformed the constitution. And so, again, he was a big part of why this era was called the Golden Age of Athens, because they had just really advanced so much, and they had a lot to show for it. Around the same time, well, after the Persian Wars ended, the Delian League was established. And the Delian League was essentially a confederation of city-states under the leadership of Athens. And it was formed in order to protect themselves after they had learned their lesson from the Persian Wars in order to defend Greece from future invasions. And so Athens was in charge. They kind of established this. And Sparta didn't join because they were very suspicious of Athens, and they kind of didn't see eye to eye with, their form of government or leadership. And so city-states that did join the Delian League, it was kind of this, again, confederation of protection. And the city-states that joined did pay money to the Delian League, and members that joined to lead were not able to resign. And so they were kind of assigned for essentially a lifetime. Athens used the money in order to advance their city and also to protect and improve the empire. All right, during this time as well, the Delian League and also the Golden Age, there were a lot of cultural achievements for Greece. There was Greek drama, plays were written, history was built, pottery and craftsmanship, as well as architecture. And I'm going to move my picture here so that you can see the different forms of art. And oftentimes, they took a lot of pride in the types of buildings that they built, and they oftentimes built them as a way to honor the gods. And so the Parthenon is a temple to Athena. And again, they would choose these individual types of architecture. And you can again look up these if you would like to know a little bit more about these different types of the Corinthian or the Doric or whatever. All right, so the Peloponnesian War took place in between 431 and 404 BCE. This was a very famous battle war in between Athens and Sparta. But because of the Delian League that I talked about a couple slides ago, Athens was very strong at this time. They actually had built a wall around Athens. They had money coming in. And regardless of that, in 431 BCE, the king of Sparta invaded Athens. Athens did have a superior navy. They had a great showing with regards to the army, so they did and were able to fight back. There were 3 phases to the war. You can look them up if you're more interested in what those phases were. But the Spartans then did something pretty intelligent, and they recruited help from the Persians, which the Persians had lost the war during the Persian Wars to Greece, but Sparta went to them and recruited their help in order to beat Athens. And so the war ended the golden age of ancient Greece when Athens fell to Sparta. All right, there were some pretty amazing intellectual leaders during this time as well. Socrates was one of them, and he lived during the Golden Age. And he lived from 469 to 399 BCE. He was a teacher and a philosopher. He did fight in the Peloponnesian War. He taught his students by asking series of questions, and oftentimes those are called Socratic seminars at this point in time. And the Socratic method, he didn't accept any money for his teaching, and he was kind of a controversial figure at the time. People thought his ideas were very outlandish. He expressed unpopular opinions, and people thought he was corrupting students, and so they really didn't trust him, and so it led to his persecution and death. Plato was a student of Socrates. He was a teacher and a philosopher as well. He wrote about Socrates, and he actually started the academy, which was a school that lasted for more than 900 years, and it did educate quite a few astounding intellects during the time. Aristotle was a student of Plato's, and he lived from 348 to 322 BCE. He started the Lyceum, and he developed a lot of advancements in scientific research, and he researched and wrote about politics, government, virtue, ethics, and he was actually a tutor of Alexander the Great. All right, Alexander the Great, also a very, very well-known Greek conqueror. He was a Greek warrior, and he was actually the king of Macedonia, and he lived approximately 300 years before Cleopatra. He was a very strong leader, a warrior, intelligent, very good looking. He conquered much of Asia Minor and Egypt, hence why Cleopatra then was the queen of Egypt when she took over a couple of 200 to 300 years later. He also was able to conquer the Persian Empire. And when the Persians tried to offer a truce, like, hey, Alexander, we know that you're going to win, and so we want to offer you half the kingdom. Alexander was like, yeah, no, I would actually prefer to have it all. And so he took it all. So that is by no means all of Greek history. It just is a little, tasting and smattering of it. And so again, like I said throughout this lecture, if you're interested in any aspect, go ahead and research it on your own. There's tons of books and websites and videos that you can use in order to further educate yourself. So thanks for listening, you guys. I appreciate it.